I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a classic adventure game based on the short story with the same title by Harlan Ellison. It has a name that is disturbing to even imagine, but the game isn't jump out of your seat scary, it's a psychological horror all the way, and it deals with very difficult subject matters like rape, insanity, the Holocaust, and lots of torture. You play as 5 characters: Gorster, Benny, Nimdoc, Ellen, and Ted, the last 5 people on Earth, and each has a unique flawed personality. The 5 have been trapped, kept alive, and tortured for 109 years by an immense supercomputer made to have real artificial intelligence, known as Allied Master Computer, or AM for short, better known as AM, as in, I think, therefore I am. So each character is sent into a scenario created by AM to throw each character's flaws into their face, and the only way for them to escape is to overcome their flaws, make ethically challenging decisions, and fight back against AM. The game develops each character much more than in the short story, and Harlan Ellison actually designed the game himself, along with a couple Davids, so the characters actually stay true to what was originally intended while going much deeper. But there are a few contradictions between the game and the short story, like how Benny is gay in the short story, but he had a wife in the game, and how it says explicitly in the short story that Nimdoc was a name given to him by Am, but when he's interacting with people from his past, they all call him Nimdoc. And it's unclear how the short story relates to the game. Some things from the short story are mentioned that they happened in the past, but other things from the short story actually happen in the game. So the game is really telling a totally different story with the same characters. And in the game story, Am seems much less threatening. In the short story, Am seemed sort of like a great old one from H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. He's an incomprehensibly large being that can wipe out mankind with little effort, and just being in his presence can drive people insane. But I guess that's where the similarities end, because the thing that makes Lovecraft's eldritch horrors scary is their indifference towards humanity. They don't care whether we live or die. But Am does care. He cares immensely. He hates humanity with every circuit of his being, and spends most of his time taking that hatred out on the 5 main characters. But in the game, he seems less thorough with his torture. In the short story, he will melt your eyeballs for even thinking of escaping. But in the game, he lets the characters run free in the mentally scarring places he creates with horrible things from their deepest fears. And in letting the characters do that, they find ways of trying to stop him, loopholes in his security. In the short story, he was much scarier because the characters had no way of fighting back, and they had lost all hope. He was impossible to combat because he was like a god made of steel and wires with self-repairing systems to counteract any damage that the characters could do. In the game, Am just lets the characters find ways of fighting back. He just lets it all happen, passively. And another thing I didn't like about the game was the difficulty. I wouldn't have been able to beat it without a walkthrough. It is as unforgiving as old Sierra games, but instead of killing you outright, it tends to just make the game unbeatable. Like, oh, you forgot to pick up that one item that you needed that blends into the background? Too bad. You're getting sent into a new area with no way of getting back. Good luck! And the puzzles aren't as much about solving a puzzle, it's more about figuring out what the developers wanted you to do, especially in the end game sequence. I think that most of that came from inexperience from the dev team. You can just feel that most of the people who made this game hadn't worked on games before. And it makes the game seem older than it actually is. I mean, really, this came out the same year as Chrono Trigger, Donkey Kong Country 2, and Full Throttle. Overall, I liked seeing more development in the characters, but it wasn't worth the bad gameplay. If I had to choose between recommending the game or the short story, I'd recommend the short story, which you can read online for free. There's a link in the description.